February 7th, 2024. It is episode 36 of the In a Nutshell podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and as usual, I am joined by Joe Meade. Tonight, Joe and I will go over some happenings in the Big Ten, from Purdue's victory over Wisconsin, Indiana's comeback against Ohio State, and then some staff changes on the football side for the Michigan Wolverines. So, Joe, as usual, we'll go to football first, and Jim Harbaugh is unfortunately taking a lot of his Michigan staff to the NFL. Could you update us on what's going on there?
Yeah, so I think we touched on Ben Herbert leaving, the strength and conditioning coach, really the culture setter of the program. Maybe not the sole culture setter, but certainly a focal piece. Uh, on top of that, it looks like he's taking Mike Elston. Mike Elston just really the strength of the game, probably like 2 decades. Following from him from Cincy to Notre Dame. When Brian Kelly took the job in late 21 to go to LSU. Everyone thought Elston was going to follow him. He actually stayed at Notre Dame for 2 extra months, and then Jim Harbaugh called Elston, and Elston was a player on the '97 team, friends with John Jansen, the captain of the '97 national champion team. So not too shocking, but this was probably decently surprising. It's not surprising that any college coach, as we talked about on Saturday, would leave for the NFL, but maybe a guy whose whole career's been in college and a guy who played at Michigan, you thought he would have stayed, but certainly can't blame him and can't blame Coach Harbaugh for taking probably the best assistant position coach on his staff to LA. It's unclear whether Steve Clinkscale is also going to leave. He was the co-DC, and he's been at Michigan for a little longer than Elston, 3 years, a year longer. Really turned that secondary around after the disaster season of 2020. So, Sean, this leads me to an exciting piece of news and one that's relevant to a lot of the Northeastern guys on this cast. Michigan tomorrow is going to interview Wink Martindale. And Wink Martindale, Sean, I'm going to let you comment because I know you all played to say as a Giants fan. He was really the mastermind of that new Baltimore defense we saw from 2018 to this year. And as a lot of you know, Jim Harbaugh brought in Mike Macdonald, the current head coach of the Seattle Seahawks, former DC for the Ravens, as the Michigan D coordinator in 2021. And talk about a miraculous change. If you look at Michigan's stats from 2020 defense to 2021, it is worlds apart. And Jesse Minter, who's now the DC of the Chargers, also a Ravens guy from that system. You see that little coaching tree, the Wink Martindale defensive coaching tree. You got Wink, Mike Macdonald, head coach now. Jesse Minter, defensive coordinator for the Chargers, well on his way to probably being a head coach at any level if he wants to. And then, guys like Bobby Orr, who's going to be the DC for the Ravens. And Sean, as a Michigan fan, this has to put a lot of excitement into you. I understand.
Did we lose you there, Joe? Hang in there for a moment while we fix this.
Perfect. Sorry about that audio delay for our live listeners, but mainly the Spotify listeners, nothing ever happened. So, as I was saying, Wick Martindale, this news has to excite you if you're a Michigan fan. He was the mastermind of the defense along with John Harbaugh. Certainly wouldn't want to discredit Mike McDonald or Jesse Minter or any of those assistants for their, I guess, the architecture of the scheme. But Wink is often hailed as the mastermind. I think a lot of Giants fans might be divided on him, but there are a more reasonable constituents that say he was probably the bright spot of the season. Actually, the last two seasons. If you look at the talent of the Giants defense compared to a lot of defenses in the league and the improvement they had from 21 to 22 when he got there, I'd say a lot of people give him more praise than flack. And Sean, I'm gonna give you the floor on this as a Giants fan. What do you have to say about Wink?
I mean, he's a good defensive coordinator in the NFL, and that usually means that that's going to translate pretty well to college. Obviously, the way that he went out of the Giants was really immature and not something that you expect an old school dude like him to do. But his defenses are fairly simple. Blitzed more than anyone else in the NFL other than the Vikings and Brian Flores. He trusts his corners to have single coverage. A lot of cover zero, a lot of safety blitzes, a lot of corner blitzes, and more times than not, it pays off. The offense was the worst in the NFL this year. The defense ended up in like 25th for the Giants in points per game this year, but a lot of players develop under Wink. He uses a lot of different defensive linemen. He trusts his corners. He has a lot of hybrid linebacker, safety, defensive end types like Isaiah Simmons, and ultimately he gets the job done. 2 years ago when the Giants made the playoffs, their defense was up there with some of the best in the NFL, I think. So obviously, the way that he went out was pretty ugly for the Giants, but he's a good defensive coordinator, and hopefully it would make sense for him to go to Michigan. Obviously, you know his connection with the Harbaugh family, as Joe said earlier, but I would be really excited. Your neighbors to the east just pulled off a pretty big, high-profile coordinator. This would be a pretty similar stature type of move, I would think.
Absolutely, and maybe they're not even keeping that coordinator. We'll probably know in the next 48 hours about Bill O'Brien. Nothing official yet, so I don't want to comment. But one thing we can comment on, Sean, is Iowa finally got their guy, Tim Lester. This was older news, but as I saw by direct messages, and maybe Sean did too, we definitely forgot to cover Tim Lester, the old Western Michigan head coach, the new offensive mastermind. And I say mastermind half sarcastically, half realistically, because I think anyone would have been better than Brian Ferentz at this stage. But nonetheless, he's in charge now, hoping him and Cade McNamara can have some kind of chemistry. I know Cade and Brian clashed heads a few times. Maybe that's just the competitive nature of both dudes. But Tim Lester does know Cade McNamara pretty well. He played against him in 2021, so definitely a guy that's already knows the strengths and weaknesses of Cade. Certainly is no stranger to the Midwest, being at Western Michigan, was at Purdue before that as the quarterback's coach. So I wouldn't say a full-on Big Ten guy, but a guy who certainly isn't I'd probably call him if he wasn't a Big Ten guy, he's the step below that. So I think that's an interesting hire for them. No one knows how this is going to work out. I'm only covering it because it'll be an improvement. Now, how big an improvement, we really don't know, Sean. And I think we'll find out more come fall camp. And just to update everyone, Michigan's currently up 5 with under 4 to go on Wisconsin. So this will be interesting to see in real time. But Sean, if you don't have anything else on football,
yeah, it's just
the basketball
for Iowa's new OC. The bar is really low. Gotta clear it. You're not hiding in the Big Ten West anymore. If you can't score, you're not going to win the division. There is no divisions anymore. You're not going to make the Big Ten championship if you do that again. So, Iowa fans can hope it can't get worse. So, good luck. Joe, we'll put Michigan and Wisconsin towards the end, but we're going to talk about first in basketball here, the game that on Sunday, I think both you and I agree, may have decided this Big Ten title already. Purdue goes into the Kohl Center. They get the job done. They win by 6. In control for most of it. Lance Jones had a nice game with 20 points. Braden Smith, 19. A bunch of really big mid-range jumpers for him. 80, 18, and 13. I thought Wisconsin did a decent enough job preventing him from getting the ball, but ultimately didn't mean much. Purdue wins this game on the road, and they're on their way to a Big Ten championship. Any thoughts?
Yeah, not really, Sean. I think it was what we called Purdue toward the end of November and early December until they lost to Northwestern, machine-like, right? Nothing too fancy they did. They had 2 scorers. They had Edey contributing, and they didn't let Wisconsin get hot. They never let Wisconsin back into the game, and they never let the crowd take over. That's how you win on the road in the Big Ten. And Purdue that was a masterclass of how to win on the road in the Big Ten, Sean. I had a discussion with a IU guy earlier today at work. He was saying the Big Ten, the past, probably since post-COVID, teams rarely win on the road. And that kind of included Purdue last year. Clearly they ran away with the conference, which they're on pace to do again this year. I think a lot of people thought Wisconsin was going to win this game, Sean.
Yeah.
A reasonable amount of people. Is that fair?
Well, Mike and I talked about this on Tuesday or Monday, or Sunday maybe, Sunday night, that I don't think many of us picked Wisconsin to actually win the ball game, but they never were gonna win the game during the game. They were never in position to win the game. And you think at home, big atmosphere, big dogs in the conference coming to your place, you got to have a run, you got to have a lead, you got to at least you might be able to win this ball game now. Never had that. And that was disappointing for me. I don't think that should really ever be the case when you're the home team. And this is the conclusion that we came to, Joe, and I'll ask you if you agree. I feel like that was kind of what Wisconsin's capable of. They did the things they're good at, and Purdue is capable of so much more than what they produce, and Purdue still won the game pretty comfortably.
Yeah, so I think you and Mike, from what I listened to on your cast as well, I think you put a ceiling on Wisconsin. I think they're a high floor, not low ceiling, but high floor with a realistic ceiling kind of team. Is that fair?
Well, they could have made more than 3 of 19 threes. If you make 6 or 7 or 8, you might barely win the game, but that's still with, I think, an average Purdue performance at best. So yeah, I think there is a ceiling here. You can only do so much with the 6.5 players that they have.
Absolutely, Sean. And as we're seeing right now, they might be on the midst of the 3rd straight loss, but again, it's currently Michigan 6 up, and people are going to be listening to this tomorrow morning. So as of now, Terrence Williams just hit a free throw. Michigan's up 7. But Sean, anything else on Purdue?
They get a week off before a game on the weekend that we'll talk about at the end, but I think we're good with Purdue, and then depending on how these last minute or two go for Wisconsin, we'll hit them on the end. We're going to go to my team here now, Joe, and quite a whirlwind of games since we last talked. They lose to Penn State by 14 at home. They have a 10-point lead in the first half. They look like they're going to cruise. And then Penn State starts getting really hot from the field and runs them out of their own gym. Obviously, really disappointing there. But then, yesterday, on the road at Ohio State, they come back from 18 down in the second half and pull off a pretty impressive victory. So, obviously not the week that we expected, Joe. And is this just another example of how inconsistent the Hoosiers are this year?
I think there's a lot of messages you could take from this game. I think, to be Captain Obvious, to lead off with this, if you were an Indiana fan, you thought you were going to go 1-1. I think a lot of Hoosier fans expected it. Clearly, the games they predicted they'd win and lose were wrong. I don't know how you would feel as an Indiana fan. Sean, I'm really curious. Do you feel like it's a missed opportunity, especially the Penn State game? Or is it the one hand out the other and you're kind of where you are? Does that make sense?
Yeah, because while I do think Penn State had they got a lot of shots to go in, that, like, they had a couple threes that weren't swishes go in, and that's frankly just pretty lucky. And then they had Qudus Wahab had some pretty crazy shots in the paint that he just kind of flung up there, and they happened to roll in. So I think you got a pretty impressive Penn State performance, but it just snowballed like crazy fast. And Penn State hit some good shots to stay in the ballgame in the first half, and they're up at halftime. You're like, all right, Indiana's up by 4. Penn State's making some crazy shots. This is going to be a 15-point Indiana victory. But it completely flipped in the second half. They let it snowball. They really couldn't guard the basketball, and everyone kind of closed the curtains on the season for Indiana until they prove that they're still fighting, even though it might be a real low chance at this point to make the tournament. They pick up a road win against a pretty bad Ohio State team. They guard the ball better. But, Joe, I think this Indiana-Ohio State game is just a really good example of how bad the Big Ten is this year. The fact that Indiana is a middle-of-the-road team, I think, is a negative for the conference. Most years, this Indiana team would probably be in the 10-11 range in the conference.
I think that's very fair to say, Sean. I also think it speaks volumes, and we'll get onto this in probably just a second, on how far Ohio State's truly fallen.
Yeah, so, Joe, I think we're good on Indiana. They've been really inconsistent. They've had some great stretches and some poor stretches, and likely that is probably going to continue. They're probably going to beat a couple of these tournament teams that they have on the resume the rest of the year, and they're probably going to lose to some teams that are in the lower parts of the conference. But, Joe, before we wrap this game, if you are an Ohio State fan and you fell asleep at this time last year and woke up right now, you're experiencing the same exact thing. They look pretty promising out of the non-conference, and then everything unravels really fast. Do you think they move on from Chris Holtmann?
I really think this is the lamest answer I can give. I don't know. I think with the athletic director situation at Ohio State, the fact that most athletic directors on their way out. I know Ross Bjork just hired Mike Elko at Texas A&M, but he wasn't publicly going out. Gene Smith made it crystal clear this summer he was leaving, and he's often defended Holtmann in the press. Hasn't even left it up for interpretation whether he'd come back in the past. So I truly don't know, Sean. If my opinion means anything, I truly think he's a really good. I think last year was his one terrible season, and I think this year is not going to be terrible, but it's certainly disappointing. If I'm Ross Bjork, I give him one more year. I think Ross Bjork's done a great job with NIL. I mean, just look at the football program right now, the guys they're adding. Maybe you have a modified approach of that for basketball and give Holtmann kind of an ultimatum that he seems to be giving Ryan Day, which is, if you can't win with this, we're going to have a talk. Only more serious with Chris Holtmann because he does not have the pedigree or the accomplishments that Ryan Day has had in his 5 years at Ohio State. Sean, what do you think?
I think they're definitely thinking about it. And, we said last year Chris Holtmann's a really good coach. This still doesn't erase what he did at Butler and early on at Ohio State, but I think they're either going to fire all the assistants and basically make him get an entire new staff, and that's as close as it gets to a new coaching staff, or I think there's probably about a 50% chance that they pull the trigger right now. They have a good team. Bruce Thornton, Roddy Gale, those guards should be better than what they're doing right now. They have length.
Jamison
Battle's a Big Ten lifer. They have length on the inside. They should be a tournament team this year. They beat Alabama, who, when I last checked, was crushing Auburn. Or no, it was the other way around. But they already beat Auburn once. I'm just disappointed here, and I think letting 2 seasons spiral like this in a row, it's really hard to keep your job after something like that. So at this point, I think I would be surprised if they... I'm probably leaning right at 50-50. They'll definitely make some changes, though. Then that's for sure. Joe, we're at 20 minutes.
Sean,
go ahead.
One more point.
Go ahead.
One more point. I know we're at 20. If I can make one more point, it's that their season last year went off the rails when they lost to Minnesota at home. I think you can make an argument it went off the rails when they lost to Indiana in Assembly Hall. That started a three-game losing streak, including one to the worst team in the conference, Michigan. And then from there, they've won, what, one game? Yeah, they've won one game since that, and that was Penn State at home. So, uh, think you're exactly right. When you let out this segment off with, you were asleep for a year and you woke up now in the same situation, it is the same situation.
So, Joe, we're going to go to the second game from last night, and it was a pretty good one for the neutral. Not if you were a fan of the team that lost. Minnesota gets the job done against Michigan State, 59-56. Minnesota moves to 15-7 on the year. Not going to make the tournament unless they get the auto bid because of a poor non-conference. But just quickly here on Minnesota before we go to a bigger conversation about Michigan State. But how about Minnesota? They're sitting in fourth in the conference right now. It's 6-5. Really, really good season for Ben Johnson and the Gophers.
Yeah, I think, Sean, we had him as the hottest seat in the conference, probably even hotter than Jawan's was or Chris Holtman's. And he's probably one of the cooler seats in the conference, not the coolest, but the cooler, maybe like 5 to 7, the middle ground. But he's not going to get fired. And I think a lot of people would have been surprised to tell you that Minnesota probably is going to finish top half of the conference, certainly out of way clear of the Wednesday zone as of now. So really good on them. This was a game where Michigan State, it was a back and forth game. This was the typical game Michigan State normally falls asleep in the middle and then comes back. Tyson Walker usually hits a big shot in this situation. And one of Malik Hall or A.J. Hogarth steps up. That didn't happen. And that's maybe a little discredit to Michigan State, but I want to give Minnesota the credit where credit's due. This was a team no one gave a chance to. I think they were picked, 12th or 13th in the conference.
Yeah, I think Penn State was picked last, but yeah.
Yeah, and they're not even going to come close to that. So this might be the highlight of the season, and if it is, that's really remarkable. But I think they have a few more games left to get to the apex, if that makes sense.
Joe, at this point, is Fred Hoiberg or Ben Johnson your coach of the year?
I still got to go with Fred because Nebraska is right on the verge.
They're a year ahead of Minnesota. This feels like Nebraska last year for Minnesota. But yeah, I agree. Ben Johnson's putting his name in the conversation, which is a great sign.
Yes.
But, Joe, tough loss for Michigan State here, just 56 points. Tyson has 20, but they are not getting much from anybody else. Just 20 points outside of Jaden Akins and Tyson Walker. At this point, Michigan State is not a lock to make the NCAA tournament. They're going to have to win some basketball games down the stretch here. I was just really disappointed with Michigan State in this game, and they are not as good as we thought they were. But what were your thoughts on this one for them?
I really think it's the Tyson Walker show. I know Jaden Akins had a heck of a game. But if Malik Hall and A.J. Hogarth do next to nothing, which is what Spartan fans would tell you they did, it's not a pretty sight. This is a team that, besides the Maryland game, Sean, has proven they cannot win on the road, period. And they really set themselves up. You thought this stretch in February, they would have been favored in every game, right? And, now this Illinois game is... We said this a lot about Michigan State, how, it was the biggest game of their season, perhaps the Northwestern or what have you. This is their most important home game of the season, without question. I do not think they have the firepower to keep up with Purdue when they play them in March. This game Saturday against the team they played really well against, I don't want the notion that Michigan State plays terrible always on the road. They just lack they lack the good things that should happen on the road that normally happen to Spartan teams.
And they've minus Joey Hauser, they've returned everybody from last year. And they have a couple of promising freshmen in there in the bench, and it's just like this is what A.J. Hogarth, fifth-year senior Malik Hall, and Hogarth's a fourth-year senior. This is what they're doing on the road. I mean, you need more than this. And if that Baylor game is single handedly keeping them afloat right now, and obviously if they get Illinois, then they're probably headed for a 9 seed. But they're not a definite at this point, and there might be some things to worry, or there's definitely some things to worry about in East Lansing as they're getting caught up in the middle of the pack, which is not what we thought that they would do come the beginning of the season. So
And
Joe,
Sean,
or go ahead, Joe.
one last thing on Michigan State. If they lose this game Saturday, their games at Penn State and at Michigan, those are games you probably expect them to win. But Sean, I'll caution this. Michigan is currently slightly ahead of Wisconsin with less than 11 seconds to go, and Penn State's a team that, as the Hoosiers learned the hard way, is not going to roll over for anyone. So, with that said, Sean, those games have little incentive to win, as they're not going to get rewarded, but you can certainly get dropped like crazy if you do lose those games. And the Detroit media has been ruthless today for losing to a team that's fourth in the conference. I don't want to imagine what it'll be if they lose to the worst Michigan team in 15 years or a 500 Penn State team. But Sean, I will end with that just as the local Michigander on this cast.
Well, yeah, there's a game and a half separating 11th from 4th right now. So, it's really going to come close. We thought tiebreakers would be, maybe not to the extent of last time in Champaign. Tominaga, 31 points in the loss. Illinois gets the job done at home. They get, essentially a week off before they face Michigan State on the road. But how about this game? I thought it was two teams that both played pretty well. And unfortunately for Nebraska, Illinois just came out on top. But Nebraska was Mike's pick for Team of the Week despite losing this game. They are headed to the NCAA tournament. They beat Wisconsin. They beat Purdue. Nebraska is looking pretty good overall. They got a big one on the road at Northwestern tonight, though. But what were your thoughts on this game?
I was more impressed with Nebraska than I've ever been because I thought on the road they were just not throw the towel. Those kids worked their butt off, but I thought it was a team that you're just going to blow out, and they'd be a Maryland of last year, Sean. That's truly what I thought they were, and they proved in this game they were not. They certainly haven't pieced it together completely on the road, but I'll put it this way, Sean. The remaining road games at Indiana, at Ohio State, and at Michigan, if they play like that, they'll win all those games.
They're not gonna have to do much to go 2-1 in those 3 games. They're not gonna have to do much. One good performance and one okay performance. You probably beat Ohio State and Michigan with okay performances, and you beat Indiana with a good performance. But they're looking good right now. Bracketology for them is very interesting. Nobody has the wins that they do in the 8-9 spot. And it stinks for them that Kansas State has kind of fallen off because they did kind of crush them on the road. But just unfortunate for them. But they're headed to the tournament. And at this point, for the 8-9 teams that are looking really good, it's all about that push to try and get to the 7 seed because we've talked about it all the time. 2 seeds are not the same as 1 seeds. 2 seeds are much easier to beat as a 7 or 10 than a 1 seed. So you got to try and get to that 7 spot if you're Nebraska. If you want to make the Sweet 16. But Joe, we're going to talk about a game now. If you're good to end the talk on this one, that just went final. Your Michigan Wolverines pull off one of the more unlikely victories of the year. They knocked down Wisconsin 72-68. Michigan continues to play really well in the first half. They lead by 4, but this time honors even in the second half. Michigan pulls off an unlikely victory, and the Badgers suffer their 3rd straight loss. What were your thoughts on this one?
I think Michigan, in the last 4 minutes of watching this, while simultaneously doing this cast, gave Wisconsin so many extra possessions, so many turnovers, and there were some questionable calls, perhaps. But my God, Wisconsin, 3 straight losses. I'm not faulting them for the Purdue loss at all. Do you fault them for the Nebraska one, Sean?
Yes, because they're up by 14. You would say if you lose on the road at Nebraska, you'd be like, all right, Nebraska's a good team. But if you're up by 14, it doesn't matter who you're playing, you should win the ball game. And they didn't do it. They head up to Rutgers on the road on Saturday, Joe. That's not a place you want to go needing a win because Rutgers is certainly not a good basketball team, but their culture is there, their toughness is there. They are hard to score against, and even Purdue just barely won there. So this is, I am setting the alarm on Wisconsin right now. People talked about them maybe getting to the 1 line if they beat Purdue. Now, they're I'm hoping to do a bracketology tomorrow. They might be towards the end of the protected seeds at the end of the 4, but disappointing for Wisconsin. This is the time. If you want to have a bad losing streak, this is the time you can turn it around before the Big Ten tournament and the NCAA tournament. But, Joe, I didn't watch this game. You obviously had it on. Michigan's a team that's probably better than their record, but this is probably the worst team in the conference. I know it's on the road, but got to win this game if you're Wisconsin, and where do you go from here?
Well, Michigan's been awful at home. They have a sub 500 record at home. There is absolutely no excuse. Doug McDaniel had 16 points. They made Terrace Reed tonight look like one of the best centers in the conference. I think Terrace Reed's gotten a lot better. He is not one of the better centers in this conference. And the amount of open threes and layups they let up, and layups Michigan missed too. This game could have been worse than the scoreline. It was by 4 points, and Wisconsin had a chance to tie with a 3 right at the end. Sean, if I'm a Wisconsin fan, I am more than worried. Again, 5 of 19 from 3. What were they Saturday? 3 of 19?
Yep. That's not something that should be a problem for them. They've got good shooters.
No.
And if
you take Chucky Hep,
if it's a problem for one game, okay, but 2 games in a row, you're 8 of your last 38, if my math is correct. That is not good. It's easy to play defense when you're not making shots.
And I'm really disappointed their bench tonight. Only 6 points. Not going to get it done at all. And AJ Storr and Chucky Hepburn, 37 combined points. Everyone else tonight didn't really pull their weight. And if you look at Tyler Wall, 6 of 7, Wisconsin at a point had 70% of their points in the second half on layups, and they just went away from it and started jacking threes. I have no idea why they did that. I think that's partly on Greg Gard or whoever calls their offensive sets. That tonight was not their night, but Sean, even if it's not their night, they should be beating the worst team in the conference. Even if it's Michigan, we'd be saying the same thing, even more so if this was like Minnesota last year, who they'd lost to. So really bad on the Badgers. Michigan, I don't really know what this does for you, to be quite honest. I
think you out of last. You have the tiebreaker over your Ohio State rivals.
Yeah. You're 2 games out of playing on Wednesday. If you beat Nebraska, maybe you can start talking about, getting there Wednesday night without having to play and playing on Thursday. But other than that, Sean, I think Michigan's season comes down to 2 games, and it's just to spoil Michigan State's, which is next Saturday on Fox. But, Sean, anything else to add?
No, I didn't watch this game, but I've watched both these teams, double digits amount of times this year, and I'm not really sure how this happened. Disappointing for Wisconsin. Rutgers is obviously probably in a similar spot to Michigan, other than that they're a lot better at home, and that's where you're going next. So you're essentially playing a little bit better of a team than you just played. And, I'm worried for them. I hope they get the job done against Rutgers. But if they don't, then they have Ohio State after that. So they're playing the 3 teams in the bottom 3 in a row here to try and get a W. And they let the first one go. Can't let 2 and 3 go. But, Joe, before we're at 35 minutes now, so we'll save we won't do a preview for the weekend. But off the top of your head, what's a prediction for the bottom 4 teams in the conference for you? What 4 teams will be playing on Wednesday, and then we'll work our way up to the top.
Sure. I think Ohio State, the way they've looked, that's almost a guarantee. Michigan, they've looked good at times, but then they've looked even worse at times. They're playing on Wednesday. I hope they play each other because that would make Wednesday somewhat entertaining. Rutgers, again, we've defended Steve Peichel a million times, not in danger whatsoever with the recruiting class they have coming in and the progress they've made as an overall program. They're going to be playing on Wednesday. It's Sean, Again, another coach who's done an admirable job this year, Mike Rhodes and Penn State. Don't see them stringing enough games to stay out of 11 to 14.
Yeah,
They'll
those
play
are
on
my
Wednesday.
four. Those are my four picks at this point, Joe. I did say it in the fall. I didn't think Penn State was going to pick up a couple of victories that they probably shouldn't, because it's the first time a new coach is in the conference, and they have a couple of good players. They did that against Indiana, but they're just 2-4 on the road. It's not the sort of home atmosphere that a Rutgers or an Indiana is, where you can lose no matter how good you are, no matter how bad they are. Um, but other than that, Joe, I think the middle is the middle. So why don't we pick? I still think Wisconsin will be in the top four with Illinois and Purdue. But who's your pick for that fourth spot right now?
I'm gonna go with. I don't want to do this. I'm gonna go with Michigan State, Sean. I think they have to put it together, and this is solely contingent on them winning Saturday. If they don't win Saturday, or God forbid they lose two of their next three games, you're gonna have a whole different conversation about fourth seed in the Big Ten tourney to being any seed in the NCAA tourney.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with the winner of Nebraska and Northwestern tonight. I just think tiebreakers are gonna come in, you know, in so much emphasis on tiebreakers with how close this is. And um, have they played yet, Joe? I don't think so, off the top of my head. And they
I do
have.
not think
Nebraska
so.
won round one, so if Northwestern does win this one, then there will be no tiebreaker, and it'll come down to if any other teams are tied with them, and that's a topic for our Big Ten tournament preview when we have all the seeds and stuff. But I think Nebraska. I'm gonna go with Nebraska since they won the first one. I think they'll get the fourth spot. I think we'll see Maryland, Iowa towards the bottom of the first buys, with Minnesota, and then Indiana, Michigan State, Northwestern, somewhere in the 6, 7, 8 range. But it is going to be close. We're still looking good for 6 teams in the conference, or 6 teams in the NCAA tournament from the conference. And we got IU Purdue this weekend. We have got um, Wisconsin going to Rutgers. We've got Illinois going to Michigan State. We've got Maryland going to Ohio State, and then Minnesota visiting Iowa on Sunday. But not sure when we'll be back with you next. Mike and I are trying to go twice a week until the end of the season, and Joe might be making appearances over there on that one. But in a nutshell, still probably be at least once a week until the end of the basketball season. And then we haven't quite planned what'll come after that. But from schedules to top players of all time, we're going to keep the content